Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Mill. Today we have myself and Molly and a special guest, Chris Scaffidi, who co-designed the Fantasies and Futures expansion for Tapestry, along with Mike Young for Stonemaier Games. Just for some background, he previously self-published a 1 to 2 player engine builder called Nomadic Gardeners. He joins us today to discuss the new civilizations, the city mats, and more in Fantasy and Futures. So now I will pass it off to Chris and Molly.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and to meet you. And thank you for taking the time to learn about Fantasies and Futures.
Hello, Chris. It's nice to have you here. We're very excited to talk to you. This has been the first new release since Carol and I have joined the Mill, and we've really, as two fantasy lovers and two tapestry lovers and thematic game lovers, we both really enjoyed delving into this one. Thanks for talking with us and letting us ask a few questions.
It's my pleasure. Ask away.
I'll start off with one thing I noticed from my first game, which was a 5-player game. All of us really enjoyed the agency over the tempo this new expansion allowed us to have. It's really fun saving up for those big moves in Era 5. What was the evolution of that idea?
So I can't claim any credit for that idea, at least in its genesis. Mike Young had those ideas fairly early on to start playing with the relationship among the tapestry cards in terms of how the income turns build on one another and to build toward an end game. He called it end game effects. They ended up being income turn 5 because it just helps to make income turn 5 a little bit more different and interesting. And we could talk about what some of those effects are. The other idea that he had early on was links, which is where you put one tapestry card next to another tapestry card, a physical card. And then when you do that, you get to have those extra little bonuses. So when I came into the project, I came from the direction of working on a fantasy-oriented game that I had submitted to Stonemaier. And Jamie liked many of the ideas and said, why don't you incorporate this into a tapestry expansion with Mike if he's interested? So my role then was in many ways to think about the thematic integration of those ideas that Mike had and sort of draw them into this idea of fantasy and science fiction in a way that felt meaningful. Then the other area where I kind of ran with it was in the design of the cities and the civilizations. So if you look at the civilizations, many of them have special effects during income turn 5. And we'll go over that, I imagine, later on in the interview. But that's sort of the evolution. Mike gets the credit for coming up with it, and I really enjoyed working with him on developing the idea into other aspects of the game.
We really enjoyed the tempo of the charms as well. It's not just about having the card, but which order you play it in. And
exactly.
It really, it was really fun to have like a certain one and think, I want this, but if I play it next, I can do something on the left, in the middle, and the right. It feels like you really can get the most out of it if you plan well.
Yeah, Tapestry is a great game, putting the pressure on the players to think about the order in which they do things. And Jamie is a huge fan of order of operations as a way of making a game interesting.
Yeah, and I really think these charms were a great addition for that. Another thing we enjoyed with I keep calling it tempo, but I really enjoyed getting the space tiles earlier in this expansion. In our first play, we had someone playing the Fae folk, the Werefolk, who both were able to get a space tile early. And then I pulled the Alien Disclosures tapestry card here, where you spend 5 EP to get a space tile. Right. And just a lot of us talked after about how much we enjoyed interacting with the space tiles more in the game. What was your thought process when adding a more endgame tempo thing to be available earlier on like that?
Yeah, so the thematic premise is that each game of Tapestry essentially is a parallel universe, one in which somehow it makes sense to invent the nuclear weapons before the nail. And like it just makes sense in those physics. And so certain things will happen naturally, but if you really want to accelerate the development of your civilization, you need to come in contact with some other parallel universe that maybe has access to even more wonderful technology than the one that you have. Because maybe in your universe, you're still banging rocks together, but then oh, this, a fairy with a ray gun shows up and says, I'll be happy to sell this to you. It will only cost you 5 of your victory points. So, I think that it's really interesting to think about what would happen if we really did have commerce with other parallel realities and how they would influence our own. So we're not the first ones to think about this. There's been something like this throughout history. Every time that somebody talked about how fairies would go between this parallel reality and then come to the woods of Ireland or whatever, and they go back and forth somehow, that's movement in and out of our universe. And when you take shortcuts through space and time in science fiction, and suddenly you're a million parsecs away, well, probably not a million, but you know what I'm saying. You've taken a shortcut beyond our usual space-time continuum. So thinking about, like, what parts of the game normally happen later in the game could we bring forward to symbolize this effect of being in contact with far more advanced universe? And space tiles was one of those things. And then, also sometimes you push things the other direction in time. You push things towards income turn 5. So there's this motion across space and time that's added in this expansion that just wasn't present in earlier versions. And I liked being able to do that without having to introduce radically new mechanics. What I just described is something that somebody can learn. Basically, it's a new way of using this tapestry skills that you already have, and you don't have to sit there and have this huge new learning process, because people, of course, love tapestry. They bought an expansion because they love tapestry and they want more tapestry.
Yeah, and I agree with you. It fit in so well. You don't have to get to exploration 11. There's all these other avenues to do something as simple as the space tiles in a way that felt totally balanced.
Yeah, it is an interesting challenge to balance these things, because, if we had only made one way to pull things from the future, then whoever got to have that thing would have this immense early game advantage and just run away with the whole game. And that's not necessarily fun for everybody. So every one of the civilizations has something interesting about it. And there are many cards in the tapestry deck that will allow you to do these things.
Right. So one thing I noticed, you recently had an interview that involved Mike and Jamie, and you brought up that your favorite civilization was the Wee folk. So I was just kind of curious if you could elaborate kind of on the evolution, like going through play testing of kind of how they came about and why you like them so much.
Okay. So my company, Fervent Workshop, focuses entirely on designing games that involve mythical beings, principally Wee folk. And I'm focused on them because they, in many ways, symbolize, even epitomize, the best and the worst in humanity. You think about gnomes. They are wonderful, in most game universes. They're just so jolly, and they're so free, and they care about nature, and they're really social. And nomadic gardeners, they have an anarcho-socialist commune, and they live together in a hut. And then they work together to raise food for the food bank. This is my conception of how gnomes are. And then on the other extreme, you've got goblins or redcaps, like the nastiest things you can imagine, just really sly and mischievous. So anyway, I love to make games about Wee folk, and so they had to be in this project if I was going to work on it. So the Wee folk were actually one of the very first civilizations that I thought of, and I was like, okay, well, take a step back and think about what would the Wee folk be like. And one of my favorite characterizations of Wee folk is the Scandinavian picture of the Tomten. In Sweden, I think they're called Nisse in some of the other countries. And, they basically are like the Christmas gnomes that we have in the United States. And I worked on a project about that. But the thing I learned about them is that they kind of live among humans. They live in your barns, they live in your attics, and they do farm work. And they're actually really helpful as long as you're nice to them. So that got me thinking about the Wee folk player taking a cube representing some portion of that population and putting it into some other player's civilization mat, the city mat. And then, they have to have an incentive to place it in an interesting way. And that got me thinking about how do you construct a challenging trade-off. And then the other thing is that, as you probably know from the Fellowship of the Rings, hobbits don't really stray far from the Shire. So, they don't really necessarily explore as we folk. And in the game,
love the token reference.
yes. So we also gave them the ability to toss away one of their exploration tiles, and in exchange, they can buy an income building during some of their income turns. And that actually, so when you place a cube into another player's city map, you're not really placing it, you're giving them a cube. And so you're giving up some agency to your opponent. And that kind of throws the balance off a little bit in terms of making the wee folks slightly less powerful in exchange for the possibility of a future reward. So giving them the ability to buy an income building in exchange for a territory tile helps to bring that back into balance as well. So it's sort of engaging from both a thematic and a meaningful mechanic from both of those standpoints.
Very cool. Yeah, I had a friend, she pulled it late in our 5-player game, and she made the mistake of handing that cube to her husband. Yeah, he was not very kind with it. But,
what did he do with it?
Oh, he just put it in some place. I think he had the Netherworld map, and so he put it in a place there was like no way, because it was late in the game, that it was going to really benefit her.
Right.
But
yeah. Well, that's the smart thing to do. That's how you win.
That was really cool to see that interaction, because it was. You're right. You give up some of that agency, but then there's the other piece there to help you out.
Yeah. Another civilization where I tried to do something similar is the genies. So this guy. So every income turn, the genie allows somebody else to make a wish, and they get to pick from some of these choices down here. And then the genie player gets to have the same thing, and also one adjacent benefit on this ring of choices. So again, you're losing a little bit of agency, but you get to actually have an extra thing adjacent in either direction to the thing that was chosen. So that helps to bring it back into balance. So those two are really the ones where you give up a little bit of agency among the new ones.
Well,
I have to say, I just have to say, I didn't quite realize how much I personally loved Wee Folk till you have broken it down, and everything you list, like hobbits and all that, goblins, I just think I love those and I love those. So you've made me aware of my love of Wee Folk as well.
Okay. Well, I love Wee Folk too.
You're bringing in more people. I'll say I tried out the Merfolk actually when I was in my first solo game with it, and I loved that new puzzle. As you're saying, the Merfolk. And then today I actually played the kind of the inverse with the Elder Ones, and I really enjoyed that game to do more in that 5th era. And after that, it just made this whole new puzzle. So I was kind of curious if you could kind of talk about your inspiration for that, and that concept of finding a way so people could extend their game, and maybe the evolution those guys took during play testing.
Right. So again, Mike originally had the idea of the end game turn, and then he thought, well, maybe we'll have a civilization, which ended up being the Elder Ones, who could keep on playing thereafter. And I thought about it, okay, so you're not allowing people to have any more income turns, but they are getting in the Elder Ones, they are getting to do more achievements, so advance on the track, and so that's good. Advancements on the track, so that's good. But we could also take the one really interesting thing, maybe not one interesting thing, but sort of the most defining aspect of the income turn, which is playing that tapestry card, and allow them to keep on playing tapestry cards. And that's where I originally got the idea of the Merfolk. And I just put a pin in that idea. I didn't have any specific goal with it. And then along the way, I was thinking about what are the other fantastic beings that exist in fantasy? And I have various source books and references, and one of them I thought, I was there's a lot of folklore traditions about intelligent beings of various sorts who live in the sea. Some of them are nice, some of them are not so nice, but they have a hidden civilization. And I was this is where we're gonna take advantage of that mechanic of playing late in the game with only Tapestry cards, because they have a submerged civilization. Nobody gets to see it. They only get to see what's happening on the land because that's where everybody else lives. And then after income turn 5, they can reveal what they have beneath the sea, which is all of these extra Tapestry cards. And if you've done a good job of setting aside cards throughout the game, you get to play those. And it was really important to us that, like, not every game has an important income turn 5 in the same way. Sometimes it'll be very small. If you get, not the right luck, or you haven't spent the resources and time to dig through the Tapestry deck or whatever. Other times, maybe it's really interesting, and it's interesting in different ways, depending on which tapestries you played or what your civilization is and so forth. So this just adds another dimension to what that could be late in the game.
Yeah, so I felt like it was just such a different puzzle with both of them, just because it's like you're planning throughout the game. You might not be going as far with the elder ones, but then all of a sudden you get this influx of resources at the very end. However, you're not going to get to score your points on your board again.
No.
So it was like a whole different, like, trying to think of, okay, now how do I score points on the board?
Exactly.
On the map with these resources. And it was
exactly. Yeah, because so the elder ones do get to have the resources, the merfolk do not.
Yeah.
So they're a little bit different that way, but the merfolk get Tapestry cards, which are a resource of its own sort.
Yeah. They were just really cool and almost inverse puzzles.
It is really, I mean, when you've been playing Tapestry for years, you kind of trained yourself to collect stuff to put into the city so you complete rows and columns, because that's where so many of the points are scored. And it's, I think, really hard to think about getting points off of board play.
Yeah. Well, and then with the merfolk, you're trying to think, okay, I only can keep 2 cards. Which cards are going to be good at the end of the game that I want to bury? Which ones do I need to put above ground? And so I really enjoy just having something completely different.
It was, and like I played the merfolk, I think it was Wednesday of this week, and I buried a certain cards underneath, and then I pulled them out, and I was like, oh, this one's going to be really good. And I played it, and I only got 2 points for it. And I was like, oh, man, I could have just taken 5 for burning that Tapestry. But on the other hand, it could have been more than 5, and I was the one who chose to take the chance. And that's part of what makes Tapestry so much fun, is because you have the option to swing for the fence.
I think I had one of these too, where it was like a complete, like a push your luck gamble thing. And I'm like, oh, if I get the right, like, roll on the science die or something, it would really pay off. And it didn't. Exactly. I think I lost by like 5 points to the Atama. I was like,
Yeah, for me, honestly, I probably only missed out on 2 or 3 points. It's not that big of a deal, but on the other hand, it sticks in my memory. And so it's part of what makes the game memorable and therefore meaningful.
I love Tapestry so much for the amount of luck there is, but then the amount of chances to mitigate it as well. I really felt that in the Werefolk. You can plan as much as you want, even for a regress and a forward, but you still have to flip that tile to see what's going to happen.
Well, that's what it's like to be an animal.
we
had the opposite also. Sorry, go on. What was that?
As the thematic touches with the civilizations just really come through, I feel like, in this expansion.
Well, I appreciate that. To me, thematic integration with the mechanics is really important, because the theme is sort of the place that you transport people to. And partly that happens because of the art. But another huge part of it is because of the mechanics. And so Stonemaier makes a really big deal of creating this other place where your mind can go for a while. And you have to have mechanics that will sort of smooth that process and get people out of this world and get them thinking. It needs to be cognitively engaging enough that their mind really is in that different place. You have to be there or you're not playing the game. On the subject of luck, I wanted to briefly mention these 2 guys are kind of in some ways opposites. So this guy, you get to flip a tile and maybe you get a free advance. This guy, you get to choose you draw 2 things when you ordinarily would draw 1, and then you get to choose one of those 2 things. So it's the ultimate in luck mitigation. So I think that there are going to be there's a contingent of people out there who don't like to have a lot of luck. Like they like to have a more sense of control. And I think they're going to gravitate towards the psionics.
I think so too. I like the chaos mixed in.
You like the chaos? I like a little bit of chaos.
Yeah, that's what I mean. They're just a bit. You can still make 2 plans, but
Just a
you
bit.
don't. Yeah.
I guess the last question I personally have is, and just we've actually covered, I think, a lot of the civilizations, but are there any other like stories of development from the civilizations that you feel like we've missed tonight that you wanted to share?
Well, I'll just briefly mention that a couple of them came out of my systematic review of all the components in Tapestry and looking at sort of which specific components hadn't gotten a lot of attention in the previous civilizations compared to some of the others. And one of them was the income tracks, which the artificers get to manipulate. Basically, you can take one income building and slide it 1 space to the left if there's an empty space leftward on your income turn. And that's what you can do. May not sound like much, but I love it because you know how important it is to uncover those resource generation squares of income tracks. So you could just kind of tuck that over a little bit, and yeah, you're going to miss a couple points on the income turn, but you get an extra resource, and everybody loves that. And then the Illuminati get to mess around with the dice. They basically control the dice, and if somebody wants to use it, you get a thing. So I won't go into the details on that, but that's sort of the origin story of those 2 guys. The Celestials kind of grew out of this idea that I was playing around with. It was more of a steampunkish civilization. I think they were called the Aeronauts. I wrote about them on my blog a little bit, and they could fly around with their floating civilization, their floating capital city. And that eventually evolved into the Celestials. So that was the origin story of that guy. But you can see a lot of these were thematically driven, or they were like a mechanical idea I had, and I just put a pin in it, and I came back to it when the theme called for it.
Yeah, when I played the artificers, I noticed they could be actually one that somebody who hasn't played a lot of Tapestry could probably handle, because you can just take an income building off and you understand that's easy. But then somebody who's played it a while can really start to think about like how to move those to their advantage. So they were still just a different, interesting puzzle too.
Yeah, I really enjoy that. Jamie play tested a couple times among all the play tests that were done. And I think he was struck by the Fae Folk, which was another thematically driven one. You know, they're going back and forth between universes. So I gave them a little rondel type thing. And Jamie said, you know, he had never had a reason to count his tapestry cards, to keep track of how many there were, and to manage the number of tapestry cards. So it's like a new challenge. And you know, I think it's fun to see what kinds of mechanics the theme drives you toward. I'm kind of sad in a way because there aren't going to be any more civilizations. We're just going to get new balancing for the existing civs, but there will be no more Tapestry civilizations to discover. So
it is a little sad. I feel like we just opened the whole multiple universes up, and
I know
now it's coming to an end.
Yep.
I had wanted to ask, but I feel like our talk has kind of led to it, about how, because Carol and I both love the thematic elements so much. When you're designing new civs, if you started first with the theme and led to the mechanics, or the other way around, had a mechanic you liked, which led you to choosing the right theme for that civ.
Yeah, so it was mostly theme driven. Occasionally, and I gave some examples, if I had an idea for a mechanic, I would just make a note and come back to it when the theme demanded it. So we still have ideas for, you know, some interesting mechanical directions, but they just weren't germane to the theme, so we didn't put them in.
Yeah, that makes sense. What else did we have, Carol? Oh, you mentioned in your newsletter you have some tips and tricks for new civilizations. Can you share some ideas?
Yeah, so this week's newsletter was about the Veil and about the Wee Folk. So I gave tips on how to effectively play the Wee Folk. And a lot of it has to do with your choice of which tracks you go down. Is that they're more amenable to certain tracks than others because of the bonuses that they get to enjoy. And then the Veil I guess we can jump to the city mats if you're interested. The Vale, it has only 8 districts, but 3 districts, this one, and this one, give you something different than just a resource. And if you play them well, it can be better than just a resource. But if you don't play them well, it's worth less than a resource. So you can have either an enormously powerful civilization and city, or you can have a weaker than average one. And I actually think 3 or 4 years from now, as people get really good at playing these civilizations, maybe I have certain players in mind, maybe a year from now, they'll have gotten enough experience with the expansion that they're going to be routinely scoring like 350, 400 points or whatever. And people are going to be like, we need to rebalance all this. That's just sort of part of the process.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely felt that way. I had the, for my first game, the polar board, which I have here.
Mm-hmm.
And at first glance, I was like, there's so many resources here. And I just connect the dots and I'll be like rich in resources. And I kind of crashed and burned on it and ended up with no rows and columns at the end. And I see the potential, but it definitely, you have to make it happen. It doesn't happen for you.
Well, subscribe to my newsletter. I will talk
for
in
sure.
some future thing how to play polar really well. And there are certain tracks whose buildings, this is a big part of the key. There are certain tracks whose buildings work really well here. So that's part of the key, is you think that out, and then that'll give you a tip. But yeah, they can be really powerful or not.
Where can people sign up for your newsletter if they're interested in more of these tips and tricks?
After the call, I'll send you the link, but it's ferventworkshop.com. And you can just click on Fantasies and Futures, and you'll see the link to sign up to the newsletter, or there's another link up in the top. So ferventworkshop.com.
Very cool. Yeah, the one I struggled with, I think, was actually the Netherworld. I had troubles with that one, connecting the goblins to the city just based on what landmarks I thought I was going to get and then didn't get. The Vale, I felt like I had really good control and I was able to handle that one. I didn't do too bad. Oh, and I love the Savannah with the unicorns? That one I felt like I had a good handle on too. Yeah, they definitely feel unique, which I thought was actually, I think those advanced mats might be my favorite part of the new expansions. They were, once again, that thematic part was coming in even into the mats.
Yeah, we were so thrilled that Jamie said that we could make mats. One of the very first constraints he gave on us was that it had to fit in this flat envelope and maybe only have cards. And then he got more information and found out how many civs we could have and how many cities we could have, and that just made us so happy. And Jamie did a lot of the legwork looking into that. I'll just briefly mention also about the Netherworld. Okay, so there's only 4 districts because there's 4 imps that you have to catch because they're like hanging out on the outskirts of your city, and you don't want, I mean, you're already underground. Yeah, that's a bad enough place to be with your entire civilization, but now you got these imps on the outskirts of your town. Okay, so the thing is, though, when you can connect one of them, you get 2 resources. So you only have to do one thing to get 2 resources. Whereas with all of like the basic cities, you have to do a whole bunch of things to get 2 resources. So there's a potential for like, early snatches. And there are certain, those landmark cards with the blue background?
Yeah.
There's a few landmark cards that work extremely well with Netherworld, where you're going to have your opponents like, that is just not fair. Well, it isn't fair.
Oh, yeah.
Welcome to life.
Oh, yes. No, the Atama was stealing my landmarks on me pretty bad. When I had that one, I was like, I had that one planned. How dare you, stupid.
Right. That's when you need the city in a bottle and you can just get any shape landmark for points and have a tiny little city.
My friend actually loved the combination of the Fae folk with the city and the bottle. So
why was that?
The first time we played it 2-player. So it was quite advantageous for her because she was getting so many points from landmarks in a 2-player game from city and the bottle. And then in our 5-player game, she kind of wanted something she was familiar with, but for some reason that puzzle just clicked with her.
Hmm.
And she was going up. She was getting her points from the landmarks. And yeah, I don't know. She just really, I think she was really good at planning her tapestry cards. So she would know where it was going to land on her Fae Folk board. And she was able to use that very advantageously to get the income buildings then too.
That is really good. Yeah, income buildings matter a lot for the City in a Bottle, more than any other map in the entire game.
It makes sense to me. Fairies would love living in a bottle.
Yes, I mean they're small. They can be really well in there. So it just seemed like it worked thematically as well.
I suspect the Wee Folk would do very well with the City in the Bottle too, although I can't remember ever playing that one because, like I said, on most of the income turns, you can just buy yourself an income building by throwing away an exploration tile.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, you think about kind of like the components that link things, and it'll tell you whether you should try to bring those two things together or try to keep them apart as you play the game. And Wee Folk and City in the Bottle come together because of that income building relationship.
Yeah, that's really cool.
It's making me even more excited for a few days from now when I get to play next.
I was excited to see on Facebook some people are receiving their copies already. So this is really good. And one of my coworkers was in the hallway, and one of my other coworkers, so I used to work at a university. And so one of the coworkers was there, and then another coworker came up and said, "Did you hear about Chris's new game?" And then my coworker was like, "I don't know if I'm supposed to know about that yet," because he was one of the playtesters. So anyway, it's been a lot of fun to see people getting their copies of the game and getting to try it out and be excited about it. Because I'm just super excited about fantasies and futures. I'm super excited about fantasy and sci-fi, and I'm really happy for the opportunity to share it with people.
Yeah, I've definitely was holding back pictures for quite a while. So we had a few plays in already. And I'm like, oh, I can't post these yet, but I want to share them because it's fun to talk about something new.
It is fun.
Yeah, we were glad we had each other, Carol and I.
Yeah, we were definitely having conversations like, oh, you got this, or like, oh my gosh, did you see this yet?
Yeah, we had a lot of fun play testing, and we had a lot of fun just getting to design it. It was a really good time. And I also have to say that Stonemaier has been an absolute wonderful publisher to work with. You know, in my mind, they set the standard for how publishers can interact with designers, and I have nothing bad to say at all about Stonemaier. It was an absolute joy to work with Jamie and the rest of their team.
Very cool. Well, I don't think I have anything else, Molly. Did we miss anything of yours you wanted to talk about?
I glanced at my notes, and I think we got everything. Now we're just talking about how much we love it, and we could break down everything in it, but it would keep going forever.
So, Chris, is there anything you feel like we missed that you wanted to bring up, or?
Well, I'll play a game against you guys sometime if you're interested.
Definitely.
We'd love that. Are you going to Geekway?
I might. I'm more likely if I'm going to go, it'll be to Design Day. So if you guys want to go to Design Day, that's where I originally met Dusty. So if we get a chance to play, I would love to do so.
Yes, definitely.
We would as well.
Yeah, that's definitely on my list of things I would like to do.
Okay.
So, very cool. Yeah, so hopefully we'll be able to do that sometime.
I hope so.
But besides that, I think we're good. So, Chris, thanks so much for joining us. It was really interesting hearing about kind of the stories behind the designs.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the opportunity to be on your show, and I'm going to keep watching it because you guys are a lot of fun.
Thanks so much, Chris.
Yes, thank you so much.
All right. Well,
bye.
Bye. I think that's it from the mill.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.